الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على خاتم الأنبياء وسيد المرسلين وعلى آله وأصحابه الغر الميامين ومن تبعهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين. أما بعد، أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. يا أيها الذين آمنوا أطيعوا الله وأطيعوا الرسول وأولي الأمر منكم فإن تنازعتم في شيء فردوه إلى الله ورسوله. وقال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم: عليكم بسنتي وسنة الخلفاء الراشدين المهديين من بعدي. Respected brothers and sisters in Islam, I am very glad to be back at the masjid on Devonshire Road in Cambridge, and the masjid is called Masjid al-Ikhlas. And I'll quickly put on the mic on myself. Masjid al-Ikhlas has been doing these events specifically about the history of Islam and some of the people within our history, people who have made a difference throughout the Islamic history, people who are seldom talked about. And some of the lectures we have done in this masjid, Masjid al-Ikhlas in Devonshire Road, Cambridge, some of the topics or some of the personalities we discussed were people like Shah Waliullah Muhaddis ad-Dehlavi rahmatullah alayh, Tipu Sultan Shaheed rahmatullah alayh, Nawab Siddiq Hassan Khan rahmatullah alayh, and others like Sultan Salahuddin Ayyubi rahmatullah alayh. Today we will be talking about, if not more important, an equally important personality within the history of Indian Islam. We have talked about Shah Waliullah Muhaddis ad-Dehlavi rahmatullah alayh, that the role he played in reviving Islam in India was absolutely paramount. He played a very, very vital role to revive the call of al-Islam in India. We discussed in his biography that India was going through turmoil, political chaos. The Mughals were facing a sharp decline, and by the mid-18th century, 1750s, the foundations of the Mughal Empire were shaken to the core. And this is the time when Shah Waliullah Muhaddis ad-Dehlavi rahmatullah alayh is writing in Delhi, the capital of Muslim India. By the 1750s, a number of regional powers and foreign powers had arisen, and they started to compete for power, for land, for influence, for wealth in India. So from the ashes of the Mughal Empire rose powers like the British, the Marathas, the Sikhs, the Jats, and the French as well. So many people were competing, many powers were competing, and this caused a very, very sharp decline. Not only politically, even morally the Muslims suffered. With political decline came financial decline, and with financial decline came faqr, poverty, lack of provisions, and with that came lack of moral training. So the Muslims, they started to lose their moral values, unfortunately, and the teachers and the schools had declined with very few exceptions. So at this point, Shah Waliullah rahmatullah alayh was writing to revive the spirit of Islam in India. And we have talked about him extensively in detail. You can go and listen to that lecture. It's a very, very important, informative lecture. You must listen to it to understand what happened during this period. The person we will be talking about today is Shah Ismaeel Shaheed rahmatullahi alayh. Ismaeel Shaheed was a direct descendant of Shah Waliullah ad-Dehlavi rahmatullahi alayh. So Shah Waliullah had 4 sons. The firstborn was Shah Abdul Aziz, then was Shah Rafiuddin, then was Shah Abdul Qadir, and then was Shah Abdul Ghani. These were the 4 sons Shah Waliullah rahmatullah alayh had, and Muhammad Ismail also known as Shah Ismaeel Shaheed, was the son of the last or the youngest son of Shah Waliullah ad-Dehlavi, called Shah Abdul Ghani. So each and every single son of Shah Waliullah rahmatullah alayhi had a role to play in the revival of Islam after their father's death. We have discussed already that their father was a giant of a figure in Indian Islam, having written monumental works such as Hujjatullah al-Baligha on the philosophy of Islam, why the Sharia is what it is and what it does to societies. Then books like Izalatul Khifa an Khilafatil Khulafa, on the concept of Imama in Islam, to do away with the shubahat, with the doubts that had arisen with the increasing Persian influence or the Shia influence in the Mughal court, and by extension in the educated circles of Delhi and beyond. And then there were works like Al-Fawzul Kabir on Usul al-Tafsir, and there were works like Budur al-Bazaga. Shah Waliullah had written on almost every single important Islamic science, even the science of Hadith. So his sons carried on the legacy. Shah Abdul Aziz, the oldest son of Shah Waliullah, was also a muhaddith, a polymath, a master of the science of Hadith, who had written extensive works on Hadith sciences. One of them is called Ajalat al-Nafi'a, which is a very, very powerful treatise on the science of Hadith. Also, Shah Abdul Aziz wrote a biography of Muhaddithin, a history of the Muhaddithin called Bustan al-Muhaddithin. He also wrote a very powerful treatise on Sunni Shia differences called Tuhfa Ithna Ashariya. So he was a pioneer, following on from the works of his father. He produced original works, very, very unique works, which were necessary for the time. Likewise, Shah Rafiuddin and Shah Abdul Qadir, Shah Abdul Aziz's younger brothers and the younger sons of Shah Waliullah, they wrote translations of the Quran in the Urdu language. They wrote other treatises. They wrote other works. But Shah Abdul Ghani was the youngest, who died a very young man. He was a mystic of a sort, what we call Zahid or Abid, someone who would be diligently praying day and night in the masjid. And he died a very young man, in his early 30s. So he had Shah Ismaeel Shaheed or Muhammad Ismail as his son, who was a grandson of Shah Waliullah al-Muhaddis al-Dehlavi. Some scholars such as Sayyid Abul Hasan Ali Nadwi rahmatullah alayh were of the view that because Shah Abdul Ghani died so young, he could not truly contribute to the literary side of Islam. But his son, who was Muhammad Ismail, had filled his gap. Allahu Akbar. Allahu Akbar. Yani, if you look at the other three sons of Shah Waliullah, Shah Abdul Aziz, Shah Rafiuddin and Shah Abdul Qadir, they didn't have sons as far as I know. They had daughters. And they produced monumental works in their own capacities. But Shah Abdul Ghani, who had a son, died very early, very young. And his son filled his gap. He filled his place and produced what he produced as his work, inshallah, as we will see in due course. Muhammad Ismaeel Shaheed, rahmatullah alayh, the grandson of Shah Waliullah, was born in the year 1779. 29th of April 1779 in the Hijri calendar. He was born on the 12th of Rabi' al-Thani, 1193 Hijri. 1193 Hijri. So he was born in the latter part of the 18th century, when the decline of the Mughal Empire was reaching its peak. This was a very chaotic period, politically speaking. So Muhammad Ismail, born to Abdul Ghani, who was the son of Shah Waliullah, was born in a period of political turmoil. And the Muslims were facing not only political troubles, they were facing theological, ideological, educational, moral, all sorts of problems. And in this time, Shah Ismaeel Shaheed rahmatullah alayhi was taken into the custody of his uncle Shah Abdul Qadir, who took care of him, who educated him. And Shah Ismaeel Shaheed, henceforth I will call him Muhammad Ismail Shaheed rahmatullah alayhi. He took education from his uncles, who were also masters of Islamic sciences. So he studied hadith with his uncle Shah Abdul Aziz. He studied tafsir with him. He studied tafsir with his other uncles, Abdul Qadir and Rafiuddin. And this took him to the heights of learning, because these were the best teachers in India. This household was the most learned, if not the most learned, one of the most learned households in the Indian subcontinent. This household in particular represented Orthodox Islam in the Indian peninsula, what we call Jaziratul Hind. The entire Indian peninsula, this household had a central position among the Muslims. Once a fatwa, a ruling was issued by this household or one of the members of this household, there was no one to challenge it in India. No one would challenge it, whether they were opponents or proponents of the same thought. They did not challenge the fatwa or the ruling of this household. So Muhammad Ismail rahmatullah alayhi had a very, very strong teachers, had a very, very strong teaching experience with his uncles. His uncles were some of the best teachers, if not in the world, in India. So they taught him and they took him through all these Islamic sciences. And by the grace of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, at a very young age, Muhammad Ismail, by the age of 16, had already mastered all the major sciences of Islam. He had studied tafsir, hadith, fiqh, mantiq, falsafa, mathematics with his uncles. And he was more inclined towards physical activity. So he would be doing horse riding, he would be playing with guns and hunting and stuff like that. And other students who belonged to the school of Madrasa Ar-Rahimiyya in Delhi, the school which was established by the father of Shah Waliullah and continued, it flourished even later on in the time of Shah Abdul Aziz. And this is the time when Muhammad Ismail Shaheed was learning from his uncles. He was inclined towards physical activity, and some of the students would complain to his uncle Shah Abdul Aziz that this young man has little interest in academic sciences. So Shah Abdul Aziz one day rebuked him in the classroom that as to why you don't pay attention to your books. Why are you always playing around with horses and doing physical activities, which Allah had instilled in him from a very young age, and we will see the result which manifested itself later on in due course. So Muhammad Ismaili responded to his uncle by saying, "What is it you would like me to respond to? Is there a question you want to ask me about my curriculum?" So Shah Abdul Aziz asked him a few questions, difficult questions, and he answered them with references. And everyone was shocked. Every student in the classroom was shocked that this boy doesn't spend much time with books, but has the ability and the memory to memorize all that information which is taught in the classroom. So Muhammad Ismail Shaheed rahmatullah alayhi, the grandson of Shah Waliullah, became a very, very prominent figure very, very quickly within the learned circles of the city of Delhi, or within the literati of Delhi. Why are we talking about him today? We're talking about this man because he has a central importance in the history of Indian Islam. Just like his grandfather, Shah Waliullah, Muhammad Ismail was no less of a personality, rather he was a man of action. Shah Waliullah wrote the theory, Muhammad Ismail applied it. He worked on it. He made it real. He made it look real. He was this close to have nearly having realized it. So This is why we're talking about him, and he inspired many future thinkers in the Indian subcontinent, including people like Sir Syed Ahmad Khan, people like Nawab Siddiq Hasan Khan, people like the teachers of the school of Deoband. They were very heavily influenced by him. Even teachers of Nadwatul Ulama, or later on, people like Ubaidullah Sindhi, people like Muhammad Iqbal, the poet. These people were directly inspired by the teachings and the thought of Muhammad Ismaeel Shaheed rahmatullah alayh. He played a number of different roles. His life, we can split it into three segments. The life of Muhammad Ismaeel Shaheed rahmatullah alayh can be split into three parts. The first part, the first phase of his life consisted of struggling with his tongue, what we call jihad bil lisan, his struggle with his tongue. The second phase of his life was struggle of his pen, jihad bil qalam. And the third phase of his life was struggle with the sword, defending the Muslims against oppression, jihad bis sayf. So we will talk about these three phases sequentially, inshallah ta'ala, very quickly in due course. So Muhammad Ismaeel rahmatullah alayh, he grew up to be a very intelligent man. He became very prominent within the learned circles of Delhi. He became a very popular young man among some of the most learned people, such as Mufti Sadruddin Azarda, who was the Mufti of Delhi at the time, who was very prominent among the British establishment, as well as the Mughal household. Whatever remained of the Mughal household, the glory was all, of course, gone. Now, very quickly, I want to explain some background to this situation, as to the situation of Shah Ismaeel Shaheed rahmatullah alayh when he was growing up in the city of Delhi. I have already explained that he was born in 1779, 29th of April 1779. What was happening at this time? Who was the Mughal emperor at the time, and who was he facing as his adversaries at the time? Mughal emperor at the time was Shah Alam II. Shah Alam II governed for almost 50 years, and his government was full of troubles, full of decline and turmoil. He is the king who lost Bengal, Orissa and Bihar to the British. So as the result of 1764, a treaty that took place in 1765, the Treaty of Allahabad is called the Treaty of Allahabad, when the Mughal emperor signed away three of the richest provinces in the Mughal Empire to the British due to military pressure. So he was the one who lost much territory to the Sikhs in Punjab. He also lost much territory to the Marathas and the Jats. So increasingly his state, his empire shrunk to what remained the city of Delhi. So he was confined within the city, and he was eventually, at this time, by 1779 or 1780, when Shah Ismaeel Shaheed was born, he was under the protection and the influence of the Marathas. Marathas in the late 18th century had come in to protect him against his enemies. He had been blinded by one of his own ministers or influential men called Ghulam Qadir Ruhila, who was a very strong noble within the Mughal court. He had overpowered the emperor, and in 1784 he had blinded the emperor Shah Alam II, and this was a very painful period for the Mughals. A lot of unfortunate events took place when Muhammad Ismaeel Dehlavi rahmatullah alayh was a young child. He was only 4 to 5 years old at the time when the Mughal emperor who was sitting on the throne, who became so weak that he was blinded by one of his own officers or one of his own courtesans. So this caused immense decline in the political power of the Mughals. And the Marathas, a Hindu power from the south, from the Deccan region, took full advantage of it, and they came into the city of Delhi under the pretext of helping the emperor against his enemies, and they occupied the city of Delhi. And they started to brutalize the Muslims and the inhabitants of the city of Delhi. This continued for nearly 20 years, this situation. And Muhammad Ismail was still growing up as a young man, and his education under his uncles continued at this time when the Marathas were occupying the city of Delhi. Then in 1803, the British defeated the Marathas successfully and occupied Delhi. So they took the city of Delhi from the Marathas. The Marathas were defeated conclusively, and the city of Delhi was occupied by the British. This is the first time the British had taken the city of Delhi in the entire history of India. 1803 was the year when the Mughal emperor, already blinded, was very old, and he would die 3 years later in 1806. So when the British took the city of Delhi, they told everyone to remain as they were, and they could practice their religions, and British were a far better choice than the Hindu Marathas. There is no doubt historically that the Muslims and the other inhabitants of the city of Delhi preferred the British rule over the Maratha rule, because the Marathas were very, very oppressive. They were very, very tyrannical and cruel, in particular to Muslims. So the British came and they occupied the city of Delhi. With the advent of British came many more problems, moral issues. Wine and alcohol was made available easily. Opium was the main trade of the British East India Company. Most of the investments of the British East India Company were in opium, hence the Opium Wars later on. Okay, so opium became very, very commonly available. Then there are other things. For example, many British officers, without converting to Islam, started to court Muslim ladies, some even from the Mughal families. And if you want to look into the details of what I'm talking about here right now in this case, you may look at William Dalrymple's works, such as The White Mughals. He has written a book, and he's a very good author, very objective author. His history writing style is very, very impressive. He's a brilliant author. I recommend strongly his books, such as The White Mughals and The Last Mughal. These are two books I recommend strongly, and these two books explain the history of India at this time in the late 18th century and early 19th century, or the first part of the 19th century, the first half of the 19th century rather. So he describes a lot of these social matters or social issues that were happening at that time. So there were many moral problems. Many Muslim ladies had married British officers. Some of the British officers had multiple wives, and they would parade them openly in the city of Delhi. One of them was Ochterlony, who was a British officer who had Mughalized himself. He had immersed himself in the Mughal culture. He would dress like a Mughal. He would have the turban and the Mughal kameez and stuff like that. And there was another man called Fraser, William Fraser, if I'm not mistaken, who was killed in 1830s. And unfortunately, he was killed because he took part in a dispute between the sons of a Nawab. Nawab was a prince, a Mughal prince, who had left estates behind, and his sons had a dispute, and he intervened, and he sided with the younger sons against the older son, and then his name was Shamsuddin, Nawab Shamsuddin. he conspired to kill Fraser, and this was a big thing in the city of Delhi in the 1830s, which is later after the death of Shah Ismaeel Shaheed. But I'm explaining the situation, what was happening in Delhi at that time. So Fraser was killed by the conspiracy of this man called Nawab Shamsuddin, who was the father of a very, very famous Urdu poet known as Dagh Dehlavi. Dagh Dehlavi is considered to be the last poet of the old school Urdu poetry from Delhi. He is considered to be the last of the old school Mughal poets of the city of Delhi. So a lot of problems are happening in the city of Delhi. Apart from the moral issues, a lot of prostitution started to happen. Basically it became a lot more common at this point, at this time, because of the Mughal decline. When the center declined, the moral condition of the people also declined. And with all of this moral corruption came the corruption of beliefs, the corruption of ideologies, the corruption of Islam itself. Islam was mixed with false ideologies at this time. People started to do things in the name of Islam, in Delhi in particular and in India in general at this point. So a strong revival or a strong voice was necessary to make a difference. At this point, what was happening? People were doing all kind of strange things in the name of Islam. They were sacrificing goats for some old saints, for example. They had a tradition called Fatima Ki Sehna. In this tradition, they would simply cook food, some desserts, and eat them on a specific day in the name of Fatima, the daughter of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. They started to go to the graves and started doing things Hindus would do in temples. Some of them were worshipping the graves, literally worshipping. When I say worshipping, this is not an exaggeration. They were doing rituals Hindus would do in temples. They would put cloths on graves. They would sing and dance. There would be Qawwali. Qawwali is a very Indian style of singing poetry with musical instruments, and it comes from the Arabic word qawl or qal. When you qawwal is someone who is singing poetry, basically, right? So the tradition is still very much alive, very, very popular in the Indian subcontinent among the Muslims. Unfortunately, it was made very popular during the Middle Ages, when some of the Sufi thinkers during the Delhi Sultanate period in the 13th century and even before that, they used this methodology to attract Hindus to Islam. This was music, because music is in the DNA of the Indian people. It is part of the Hindu religion. Music is bread and butter for the Indian people. Those of you who know what Bollywood is, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Subhanallah. Right? So music is not something new to India. It is part of the Indian religion. And to attract the Indian people, some of the Sufis, with good intentions, decided to use musical instruments with moral Islamic poetry to attract the Hindus. And it worked. A lot of people came close to these Sufi saints. They would spend a lot of time in these Sufi shrines. So the temple was replaced by the Sufi shrine. So instead of going to temples, or in fact, as well as going to the temples, some of the Hindus started to come to the Sufi shrines, and they do to this day. To this day, this tradition continues. You might have seen some Indian actors, people like Amitabh Bachchan and others, going to Ajmer, to the shrine of Khwaja Muinuddin Chishti or Nizamuddin Awliya in Delhi. It is happening to this day. And it was on the rise in the time of Muhammad Ismaeel Dehlavi rahmatullah alayh. So he saw Muslims doing all these strange things in the name of Islam. They wouldn't have relations with their wives in the first 10 days of Muharram. They wouldn't eat pan, they wouldn't dress nicely, they wouldn't put on makeup, no perfume in the first 10 days of Muharram, as if they were Shia. And they were not Shia, they were Ahl Sunnah. So the influence of the Shia had become so widespread in the upper class of Delhi that something had to be done. Islam had to be separated from non-Islam. Islam was being corrupted, or it was being misunderstood, or it was being misrepresented, misinterpreted. Some people started to think Islam is all these things they were doing in the name of Islam. Prayers were neglected, Quran was neglected, Hadith was neglected. The scholars at the time mainly studied mantiq, logic, philosophy, poetry, mainly Sufi poetry, which was also very heavily influenced by Neoplatonic ideas like Wahdatul Wujud, the unity of being, famously introduced by a man called Muhyiddin ibn Arabi, right? Who was criticized by many later scholars. Some even condemned him as a heretic. Some declared takfir on him because of his erroneous ideas. Others considered him Shaykh al-Islam, and he was very popular in India. His book, Fusus al-Hikam, was a top reading in India. So what happened? So India, partly because of the Hindu background, and Hinduism is a very mystical, spiritual, although it's not homogeneous, Hinduism is very diverse, but it is very mystical, spiritual tradition. Because of that, Sufism was very popular, because Sufism is also very mystical depending on what branch of Sufism or what type of Sufism one follows. There were different types of Sufism or tasawwuf in India. Some were completely against Islam, others were close to Islam, some were Islamic. So all of this had reached its peak when Muhammad Ismaeel rahmatullah alayh ad-Dehlavi was a young man in Delhi. So now something had to be done. All his education, all his study of Hadith, Quran. Now because his grandfather had left very strong foundations behind. Who was his grandfather? Shah Waliullah Dehlavi. He had left very strong foundations behind for his sons and his grandchildren and the students who were in thousands upon thousands. They found very strong foundations in the works of Shah Waliullah Dehlavi in Aqidah, in doctrine and creed. So he explained everything. In fact, Shah Waliullah Dehlavi rahmatullah alayh had severely condemned and criticized the practice of grave veneration, going to the qubur or going to the mazar and giving respect, excessive respect, and honoring the man in the grave excessively beyond the limits of Islam. In his book Al-Balagul Mubin, Al-Balagul Mubin is a very powerful text Shah Waliullah had written against these practices, condemning the shirk or the potential shirk of people who do such things.
What is the name of the book of it?
Al-Balagul Mubin.
It's in English.
I don't know if it's in English, but it can be found in Urdu. It is there. A translation of Urdu, it can be found free of charge online. Right? It's the PDF copy. Al-Balaghul Mubin by Shah Waliullah Ad-Dehlavi. So his son also, Shah Abdul Aziz, did some work to criticize these practices, to highlight the problems of these practices. But both of them were not very open about this, because they understood the dangers of going out openly. Because the Mughals were already in decline, society was already suffering from a number of problems. They didn't want to escalate the problems. But after the British had come to power, relative peace had come to the city of Delhi. Even though some of the ulama had given the fatwa that after the British had taken India, or the city of Delhi, India has become Darul Harb. India has become Darul Harb. And one of those scholars was the very son of Shah Waliullah Dehlavi. Shah Abdul Aziz Rahmatullah Alayh gave this fatwa that India has become Darul Harb because the Sharia of Islam has been removed, and in its place alien laws and values have been imposed. He gave this fatwa, this was his opinion. But he also acknowledged at the same time that India, or the city of Delhi in particular, and its outskirts or its surrounding areas are a lot more peaceful than they were under the Marathas. So he advised his students to work with the British for the common good of the people. You can join the service as long as you're not oppressing someone, as long as you're not taking part in any haram, any explicit haram. You're not working in a wine factory. You're not working in the opium trade. You know, the biggest part of East India Company's investment in opium. As long as you're not doing something like that, it's okay to work as a clerk. And he advised his people to learn from the British. They have a lot of things to offer. So learn from them. Take knowledge from them. It's good for us. At this time, when all of this was happening, these moral problems were there. So Shah Abdul Aziz had tried to write books, but because there was now relative calm and situation was under control, Shah Ismaeel Shaheed, who was a young man, the grandson of Shah Waliullah, who has read all the books of his grandfather, who has read all the books of his uncles, who has read most classical works available in India at that time, who had memorized 30,000 hadiths by heart, 30,000 hadiths by heart, who had memorized the Quran at a very young age. He was a scholar par excellence. Par excellence. As a young man, he became a very energetic activist to condemn such practices. And these practices, they go on and on and on. And he himself mentions them in one of his writings. If I give you the list, what these things were, you yourself will understand why he was so active at this time. Some of the things people were doing or believed in at that time when Muhammad Ismail was a young man in India, and this will ring a bell. A lot of this still exists today. So what were these things? When a boy was born, a goat would be slaughtered immediately. This was an established tradition at that time. When a woman was giving birth to a child, they would place an arrow and the Quran on her bed for some kind of blessings or to make it easy for her. When a child was circumcised, he would be paraded to different shrines in the city of Delhi and beyond possibly.
You mean tawaf?
Not tawaf, they would be taken for the blessings to the graves. And they would tie black threads taken from the shrines on the wrists of these children and put bangles on them bought from these shrines. When someone got married, they would paint the house in blue or white. They would put dots on the house. In Muharram, people stopped having intimacy with their wives. Anyone who died on a bed, that bed was considered to be, cursed. So they had to throw the bed away. Anyone who died on a bed, this was happening in Delhi when Muhammad Ismail was a young man. So when they would bury someone in a grave, they would put stones there. When they would read the Quran, Qul Huwallahu Ahad, on the stones, and sometimes they would bury the shajara, nasab. Nasab? The family tree. If someone was Sayyid, they would bury the family tree that he comes from the Prophet's family. Yani, this will save him. This will save him in his grave, basically, because he belongs to the family of the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. They considered the day of Wednesday and Saturday days of misfortune. So they would take part in Hindu celebrations like Diwali and Holi. Muslims in Delhi would be doing that. Not only Muslims, the king himself, the Mughal king, would celebrate these days in the palace with his concubines and the entourage of the palace. And many more things can be mentioned. A lot more. With the things Muslims are doing otherwise. So Muhammad Ismail, what was the solution now? So he decided that he will now take on these problems directly, head on. He will raise his voice. Something his grandfather didn't do, his uncles didn't do. They did it in their writings in a subtle way. They wrote against these practices. But this man wanted to go one step further. He wanted to stand in the Jamia Masjid of Delhi. Jamia Masjid of Delhi is the biggest mosque in Delhi, the Mughal mosque made by Shah Jahan. So, on one day, Jummatul Wada, the last Jummah of Ramadan, he stood up and he delivered a speech. This speech is documented by Mirza Harad Dehlawi, another author later on who wrote a biography of Shah Ismaeel Shaheed Rahmatullah alayh. He wrote that he delivered a speech and he one by one mentioned all these diseases directly. That you people who consider yourselves Muslims, you have Iman in Allah and His Messenger, and this is what Islam is. Then he explained what Islam is. He explained what the Sunnah is. And then he explained what they do in the name of Islam has nothing to do with Islam, the Quran or the Sunnah. This speech fell like a bombshell on the city of Delhi. This was unbelievable. Someone who had the audacity to rise and challenge shirk and bid'ah on this scale, standing in Jamia Masjid of Delhi, the central masjid, to take it head on like that. Allahu Akbar. People were shaken and people wanted to do something about it. So everyone in the city of Delhi was talking about it. Why is this young man doing this? What's his problem? And then he started to be accused. He was accused of a number of different things. What was he accused of? He insults the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. He doesn't respect his elders. He thinks he knows more than everyone else, all the other scholars. All the common accusations. When you tell someone to stick to the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ and don't divert from the path of Islam, stick to the path of the Prophet. And this one point I want to make very clearly. The closer you are to the Quran and the prophetic tradition, the less you are likely to fall prey to bid'ah and shirk. I'll repeat. The closer you are to the Quran and the Sunnah, the prophetic tradition, Hadith, what I call Hadith, or what we call Hadith, the closer you are to these two sources, the less likely you are to fall prey to bid'ah or shirk. The farther you are from these two sources, the more likely you are to become victim of erroneous practices done in the name of Islam. And even today, my brothers and sisters, look around you in the world, the Muslim world. The people who stand as the proponents of these erroneous practices in the name of Islam, they will not be close to the Quran. They will not be teaching the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ. Because every time they will open their mouth teaching the Prophet ﷺ his hadith, they will be refuting themselves. They will be attacking themselves. Because the Quran and the hadith are so clear on the definition of Islam and its purity, no one can corrupt Islam. So Muhammad Ismail rahmatullah alayhi, when he stood up and he challenged all these practices in the name of Islam, he made many enemies for himself. All these fake Sufis walking around, like a lot of them are walking around today, especially in the subcontinent community and others, fake Sufis. What do I mean by fake Sufis? People who have no taqwa, no credentials, no connection to Islam, no regard for this ummah. The fact that just put on a turban, grow a beard, and learn few words of the Arabic language, a few du'as, people start to think this man, You can try it today. By Allah, wallahi, you can try it today. I challenge you. Do it for a joke if you want to do it. Go to any uneducated Muslim neighborhood. Put on a turban and give yourself few titles. Hazrat Walaja, Pir Qadir Chishti Naqshbandi Sorwardi, something like that. Gaddi Nasheen or Khalifa of so and such and such. Wallahi, people will not ask questions. I'm saying wallahi. People will not ask questions. They will not come and ask you, where did you study? What do you know about Islam? How much do you pray? Do you even care about Islam? By the demeanor of these people, when you look at them, you know they have no connection with Islam. When you look at them, you know they have no connection with Islam, but they become people who are followed by hundreds of thousands of people. Hundreds of thousands of people. They are alive today. There are people walking around today. Fake peers, fake Sufis, fake leaders, all of them. No credentials whatsoever. No qualifications. No connection to Islam. Money, money, money. Some of them are being driven around in Bentleys and big Mercedes cars and being flown around the world in the first class, business class section of the plane. Some of them are being flown around in private jets. How? Are these people the followers of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam? Are they like those Sufis in the past? They have no connection with those Sufis in the past. Actually, some of them are very, very strong muwahidun. They did not compromise on the principles of Islam. So the money they make in the name of those peoples is haram for them, because those people had no... Take Sheikh Abdul Qadir Jilani rahmatullah alayh. Sheikh Abdul Qadir Jilani and the silsila Qadariyya is attributed to him. Sheikh Abdul Qadir Jilani rahmatullah alayh was a Hanbali by fiqh. He wrote a book on the Hanbali fiqh called Ghuniyatul Talibin, which most people who do all kind of erroneous things in his name haven't read. They haven't read this book. If Shaykh Abdul Qadir Jilani rahmatullah alayhi was alive today and he walked in the masjid of these people who celebrate feasts in his name, If he prayed with them, they would kick him out. They would throw him out. They would label him Wahhabi. Why? How did he pray? In fact, Shaykh Abdul Qadir Jilani rahmatullah alayh, he states in his book, Ghuniyatul Talibin, in this very book, he states that the biggest sign of the Ahlul Bid'ah, the biggest sign of the people of innovation, the people of Bid'ah is what? They badmouth the people of Hadith. Allahu Akbar. They badmouth. So who do you think they're going to badmouth? What is the zid of Bid'ah? What is the opposite of Bid'ah?
Sunnah.
Sunnah. What is the opposite of Sunnah? Bid'ah. So people of Bid'ah will talk against the people of the Sunnah, and the people of Sunnah will criticize the people of Bid'ah. What he said, the Shaykh, was it's common sense. That the biggest sign of the people of Bid'ah is that they will badmouth, they will talk bad of the people of Hadith. Ashabul Athar, Ashabul Hadith. And I have a makhtuta, a manuscript of Ghuniyatul Talibin, centuries old. In case people think it's been, interpolated recently. Some Wahhabis have put these sentences in the text of Ghuniyatul Talibin. No. I have a manuscript, centuries old, of Ghuniyatul Talibin. It's a book of Shaykh Abdul Qadir Jilani. So,
I think it's translated in English. It is in
Urdu and English.
Yeah, 5 volumes in English.
And when you read his method of salah, most people who follow him do not pray like him. I will repeat. Most people who follow Shaykh Abdul Qadir Jilani rahmatullah alayh do not pray like him. They do not pray like him. Don't believe me? Go and see how he prayed. He placed his hands on the chest. He did Rafal Yadain before Ruku and after Ruku. He believed in the Ameen bil Jahar. These are, fiqhi opinions. These one can differ on these issues. But imagine if someone did that in the masjid of those people who do things in his name. They would throw him out. So these are some of the things we have to think about. So Muhammad Ismail rahmatullah alayhi, he became very, very agitated about these things, and he did this speech. This speech dropped. It fell like a big bombshell on the city of Delhi, and people started to conspire against him. And cut the long story short, what they did was, and when he did this speech, people started to spread rumors about him, false rumors, as I mentioned earlier, accusations, false accusations that he doesn't respect the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He doesn't respect his elders. He is challenging all the norms. Like the Qurayshis came to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. What did they say? You think you are better than your ancestors? You are more clever? You are more learned and wise than your ancestors? You are wiser? These are the same argument, same logic. You are disrespecting your elders? You're calling them mushrikeen? Allahu Akbar. Same thing. So he became very firm in his stance, and then he started to gain support. People who had been blessed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to be guided, they came and they started to listen to his lectures, his talks, and they grew in numbers because he was speaking the haqq. He was speaking the truth, that all these things you are doing in the name of Islam. So people started to tell of him, backbite him to the king as well, king of Delhi at the time, even though the king was a puppet king. The British held the real power, and the king was a vessel reduced to being literally a puppet king. He had no power. He could not decide his foreign policy, or he could not. His rule only remained within the walls of the fortress, Red Fort in the city of Delhi. So people complained to the king. So Once Shah Ismaeel Shaheed was near the Hawd. You know what Hawd is? The fountain in the middle of the mosque. He was sitting there. So rumors are spread about him, and an old woman came walking to him. It's a joke, you know, and it's narrated in the books. She said to him, "Have you seen this new troublemaker, Muhammad Ismail?" She's talking to Muhammad Ismail himself, who tells people not to do Fatima ki sehnak, which was a tradition. People would cook food or desserts on a particular day and eat them in the name of Fatima bint Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So he said, "Who told you that?" She said, "People are saying that he's telling people not to do this. How can he do that?" And he said, "You know what? It's not him telling people. Guess what? It is the father of Fatima telling people not to do that." And the old woman was so simple. So he explained to her how. And then she said, "Okay, really? Is the father of Fatima who's telling people not to do that?" And he said, "Yes, indeed. Are you telling me the truth?" He said, "Yes." And she said, "I will never do it again." She went back. Likewise, the sister of the king, Akbar Shah II, who was governing Delhi at the time, who came to power in 1806 when his father Shah Alam II died. Akbar Shah came to power, and he also died in 1837. So he governed for nearly 31 years within the fortress of Delhi. So he had some influence. His older sister was like his mother because he respected her a lot. She was older than him in age. So someone filled her ears, you know, turned her against Muhammad Ismail. So they arranged a dinner for him in the palace, invited him. So he got a bit late, and then they had another opportunity to basically pump her. Like, look how arrogant this man is. He doesn't even care about your respect and your honor. So he came late. And as soon as he walked in, so she was an elderly lady. She had a lot of respect and power in the palace. And as soon as he walked in, she said, "Is the grandson of Waliullah here?" Like in a very condescending manner. So he realized from the tone of her voice that she is upset and someone has done something. Someone has turned her against him. So he turned the situation around, and suddenly he said, "Oh, is it you?" I mean, he said her name in a very intimate way, like a son. "Is it you, my mother? Is it you talking to me?" And then her anger, you know, all the anger simply faded away. And then she started to talk to him. And then she asked him, "Are you the one who's telling people in Delhi not to do Fatima ki sehnak?" You know, this tradition they had in the name of Islam. He said, No. Who the hell am I to do that? I have no power to. I have no authority to do that. I can't tell people to do this or to do that. It is the father of Fatima. And she asked him, Where? Where did the father of Fatima tell people not to do it? And then he narrated the hadith of Bukhari, "Man ahdasa fi amrina haza ma laysa minhu fahuwa raddun." Anyone who invents a new thing into Islam and it is not from Islam, it is rejected. So when she heard that, she said, "Anyone who does this now in my palace here, I will punish that person." So even she, Allahu Akbar, listened to him, listened to his reasoning, and she changed. Likewise, the king once invited him and asked him, "Why do you not pay respect to the, what do you call them, you know, tabarrugat in English?
Relics.
Relics. Why do you not pay respect to the relics of the Prophet?" And he said to the king, "You know what? I don't consider them real. They're not real. So that's why I don't pay respect to them. They are not real." And the king said, "No, you should pay respect to them." He said, "No, king, you don't even believe they are real. You don't believe they are real." He said, "How?" He said, "Because they bring the relics to you, to your palace. If they were real, you would go to them. You would have true respect in your heart for the relics of the Prophet ﷺ. Even you don't believe they're real." And the king had nothing to say. King had nothing to say. So he had these arguments with all these prominent figures. And then a time came when his opponents decided that we must stop this man. We must stop this man. So what they did was, they filed a complaint with 1,500 people signed the document that Muhammad Ismail's speeches must be stopped. He cannot be allowed to speak in the Delhi Jamia Masjid. So they went to the British resident, the main man in Delhi, and there was a Muslim scholar working in the office of the resident who was an opponent of Muhammad Ismail al-Dehlavi rahmatullah alayh. His name was Fazl Haq Khairabadi. Fazl Haq Khairabadi was the arch enemy of Muhammad Ismaeel Shaheed rahmatullah alayh in the city of Delhi. And he was behind much trouble he was facing. So he put the petition in front of the resident with the reasons as to why he should be stopped, because if he doesn't stop, then there will be riots in the city of Delhi because of his speeches. He is causing a lot of trouble. So the resident signed the decree that he cannot give lectures anymore. He cannot be allowed to do so. And for 40 days, Muhammad Ismail Dehlavi rahmatullah alayh stayed in his house, not giving lectures. And then he wrote another letter back to the resident giving reasons as to why he must be allowed to give lectures and what will happen if he does not give lectures. If he is not allowed to give lectures, what will happen in the city of Delhi? So the resident was a fair man. When he read the petition of Muhammad Ismail Dehlavi, he wanted to allow him to go back to his lectures, to start delivering lectures. So he wrote the decree and gave it to his opponent Fazl Haq Khairabadi, and he did not deliver the petition. He put it in his pocket. So some days later, Muhammad Ismail didn't receive a response. He came back to the resident. The resident received him with utmost respect and dignity and honor, took him inside, and Muhammad Ismail said, "What happened? You didn't respond?" He said, "No, I responded 6 days ago." So I didn't receive it. So he invited the guy, Fazl Haq Khairabadi, to come, and then they realized he's the one who held it back. So the resident punished him by suspending him for 3 months, sent him away, and Muhammad Ismail Dehlavi rahmatullah alayhi was reinstated in his position. He started to give lectures. While all of this was happening, there are some stories I want to share very quickly, and very shortly, very inspiring stories of the effect Allah had put in his, in his speeches, in his words. Once he was standing on the doorstep of Madrasa Rahimiyya in Delhi, and he saw some young women without hijab, done up, they look like they're going for a party somewhere. And he asked his companions as to who these women are. And he was told that these are working women. In other words, they are women who, basically, they work in brothels, basically. So he said, "Are these Muslims?" They said, "Yes, they are Muslim women." He said, "Then if they are Muslims, they are sisters. They are our sisters. So we should do something about it." So he said, "I will go to their places and preach there." So his companions, they said, "No, Sheikh, you cannot go there. You are the grandson of Shah Waliullah. What will people say? That you're going to a place like this to preach to these people?" He said, "No, I don't care about people. These are my sisters. And what will happen to them on the day of judgment?" Allahu Akbar. So what he did was, he impersonated, he pretended to be a beggar, and he went to this neighborhood and he knocked the door, and some ladies came inside, from inside, and they saw this scruffy looking man. He said, I have something to share. I want to do some, a show for you. Can you allow me?" And they said, "Yeah, come in." And he went in, and they all surrounded him. And when the senior ladies came, they had seen him. They had seen him and they recognized him straight away. And as soon as they realized this is Muhammad Ismail, the grandson of Waliullah, Allahu Akbar, even these women, even those women, they had so much respect for him, they quickly covered themselves and they came and stood in front of him. And they were like really, really shocked that he's here. And he said, "I want your attention and some of your time." He sat them down. And he started to talk to them about how fragile, how temporary this life is. This dunya is nothing. Whatever you earn from this dunya will last very little. This life is very short, it's temporary. All your pleasures, all the money you earn from this haram work is not going to benefit you here. And then he started to talk about Jahannam and the punishment of sins and the sin of zina. And he told them about this, that the amount of people you will take with you to Jahannam. Okay, fine, you will be standing in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on the day of judgment as a single person. But then there will be thousands of other men who will be standing there with you. You will be answering for them. What are you going to do then? Women. And then he started to read the verses of the Quran. And then he started to tell them about the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Having told them about the temporary nature of life, then he told them about the punishment of the day of judgment, and then he told them about tawbah. That if you repent, Allah will forgive your sins. Even though you have sinned so excessively, Allah is merciful, He will forgive you. Turn to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, turn around. And they were crying their eyes out. All of them cried. And many of them immediately stopped what they were doing. They made tawbah, the senior ladies as well as the young ladies, and those who were able to get married. He encouraged people from the city of Delhi to marry them, give them an honorable life. And when people heard that Muhammad Ismail is in this neighborhood, the entire city of Delhi, Allahu Akbar, they came and they surrounded him. Everyone is now listening. What's going on, man? This is now crazy. This man is preaching here. And Allahu Akbar, through his preaching, hundreds of those women, they changed. They came back to sanity. They came back to normality. Just like that, on one day he was preaching on the steps of Jamia Masjid of Delhi, and what do you call in Urdu, Khwaja Sarah, or how can we say in English?
Hermaphrodite.
Yes, someone like that. Someone who is actually a man but dressed like a woman, right? So this person came and he started listening to him. First he was joking around with him, but then he paid his attention to him and he explained why he cannot dress like that. Allah has made him a man and he's dressed like a woman. And he was wearing bangles and all. So he became so affected by it that he broke his bangles there and then. And he had henna in his hands like a woman. He started to remove the henna and his hands started to bleed. This is the kind of athar, this is the kind of effect he had on people, Subhanallah, Allahu Akbar, because of his sincerity. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave him a lot of sincerity and strength in Iman. So these are some of the things he did as a speaker. What did he do as a writer? Now the second phase of his life was writing. The first phase was his struggle with his tongue when he spoke against batil. Okay. Second phase was when he wrote a book called Taqwiyatul Iman. Taqwiyatul Iman shook the foundations of the subcontinent. Again, this book was written by him in the early 19th century, and it caused many people to basically oppose him. They started to write books against him, and many people started to complain about him. What was wrong with Taqwiyatul Iman? Taqwiyatul Iman was a book he had written on the concept of Tawheed. The concept of Tawheed, and in this book he had put down all the reasons as to why the Indian Muslims must change their ways. Why they have to stop doing what they're doing. All the kufr and shirk and bid'ah has to stop. And Fazl Haq Khair Abadi wrote a refutation of his book, Taqwiyatul Iman, and that refutation was brought to him while he was on his way to Masjid, Shah Ismaeel Shaheed, and he took it. After Salah he sat down and he wrote a refutation of his own work within few minutes or few hours. Within few hours he had written it, and that's why that text, which was later on published, and it was called Yak Rozi, that means one day. a book that was written in one day. So he wrote the entire book sitting in the masjid between Asr and Maghrib. He wrote it in one day. Allahu Akbar. A refutation. He wrote other works on the issues of bid'ah, issues of shirk. One of the books he wrote was called Raddul Ashraq. Even Nawab Siddiq Hasan Khan rahmatullah alayh later on wrote some extension of it. Even his father, Nawab Siddiq Hasan Khan's father, Aulad Hassan, had written a hashia, or like a commentary on this book. So his books were very, very influential. And the most influential and the most famous has been Taqwiyatul Iman, which is like the book Kitab al-Tawheed of Sheikh Muhammad bin Abdul Wahhab. It is considered the Kitab al-Tawheed of India. And it changed a lot of people, thousands of people. Some people said that close to quarter of a million people changed by this book. Within his life, while he was alive, 250,000 people had changed. Within his life, while he was alive. What happened afterwards, only Allah knows. Now coming to the final point, the final phase of his life. He had written other books. The names of his other works are also here, and we can look at them inshallah very quickly. What other books he had written. He was also a poet. There was a book called, he wrote Raddul Ashraq, he wrote Tazkirul Ikhwan, which was far bigger than Taqwiyatul Iman, but also on the issue of Tawheed and Shirk and Bid'ah, and how it is affecting Indian Muslims and is destroying them. Then Mansab-e-Imamat is another book he wrote in Persian, which was on the virtues or the qualities of an Imam. Then he wrote Risala Dar Ilm Mantiq, also treatise, a text he wrote on logic in Persian. He also wrote a book titled Tanvirul Ainain Fi Ithbat Raf al-Yadain in Arabic. This book he wrote on the issue of Raf al-Yadain, which is a highly contentious issue. This is one of the reasons why he was actually so opposed by the Hanafi scholars at that time. Not all Hanafi scholars. In fact, one of the best associates he had, one of the closest associates he had was Abdul Hayy. Maulana Abdul Hayy was Hanafi. So they had very strong love between them. Those who had knowledge, those who understood him, those who knew the caliber he had, they did not condemn him. But those who were just biased and prejudiced, they just didn't like him. So they wrote books against him to condemn him. So he wrote this book. Another book he wrote was called Idaul Haq. Al-Abaqat was also another book he wrote on Tasawwuf. Jacques Rosi, I have already mentioned, was a refutation of his Taqwiyatul Iman. Usul al-Fiqh he wrote in Arabic language. Haqiqat al-Tasawwuf was written in Persian. And Al-Arba'in fi Ahwal al-Mahdiyin. This book was written on the concept of Mahdi, which is very, very rare now. There's a copy of this particular book in Oxford University. Otherwise, this book is completely lost. It's not available. This is the only copy. And he was also a poet. He wrote a Masnavi in the praise of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala called Masnavi Silk-e-Noor. So next phase of his life was struggle with the sword.
The Usul al-Fiqh Risala, Hafiz Gondelvi has done a Shara of Arabic. Inshallah, it's going to be published soon, inshallah.
Inshallah. Usul al-Fiqh.
Yeah, Hafiz Gondelvi has done Arabic.
Okay.
Shara of it.
Basically, his writings had done the same job his speeches did. He had gained many enemies. In particular, Taqwiyatul Iman was like Kitab al-Tawheed. In Taqwiyatul Iman, when he wrote the book Taqwiyatul Iman, he knew it's going to cause a storm. He knew it's going to cause him many enemies. So when he had written this book, he had put it in front of a number of scholars from Delhi. He wrote the book and he invited scholars and learned men from Delhi, and he explained to them that I have written this book, and if this book goes out, then it will cause a lot of problems. It will cause a storm. So I want you to know, and I want you to read this book and tell me whether it should be published or not. If you think it should not be published, then we will not publish it. But if you think we should be publishing it, or if we should publish it with some alterations, then we will do it like that. But some people, and who are these people? The people I want to mention, the people who were invited to this particular meeting. There were people like Maulana Abdul Hayy. Then there were people like Shah Ishaq Muhaddis al-Dehlawi. Then there were people like Maulana Muhammad Yaqub. Then there were people like Sheikh Fariduddin Muradabadi. Then the famous Delhi poet called Hakim Momin Khan Momin, he was also present. And then Abdullah Khan Alawi. All of these people were present, and he presented the book to them. Majority of them, they said, this book should be published, it must be sent out, and this book is necessary for the people of Delhi, for the Muslims of Delhi, for them to come back to true Islam and abandon bid'ah and shirk. And alhamdulillah, by the grace of Allah, the book was published, and many people paid great tributes to this book. One of the Hanafi scholars of India, his name was Ubaidullah Sindhi, who was a very prominent activist. He stated that if Taqwiyatul Iman was published or introduced 5 centuries earlier, the history of India would have been completely different. The history of India would have been completely different. Then a Deobandi scholar, Rashid Ahmad Gangohi, rahmatullahi alayhi, stated that by this book 250,000 people had changed their ways within the life of Muhammad Ismail rahmatullahi alayhi. What happened afterwards is not truly known. We don't know the effect of this book. So this man was not only a man of talk, he was a man of his words, he was a man of the pen, and now came the time to use the sword against a power who had risen in India to destroy the Muslims. And who were these people? We are talking about the Sikh Empire in Punjab, in the Punjab region. Before I go on to that, something important happened in this period. In the 1820s, when Muhammad Ismaeel Shaheed rahmatullah alayhi was still a relatively young man, he was in his 40s, early 40s, he met this man called Sayyid Ahmad Shaheed. Sayyid Ahmad Shaheed was a Sayyid who was from the descendants of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. This man, Allah had blessed him with kiramat. You know, he had a lot of zuhud and taqwa. This man, Allah, what we call sahib al-kiram, right? And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had given him some qualities which people could easily recognize that he is not an ordinary man. And he had a lot of followers, and he was known for his sincerity, and he truly felt for the Muslims of India at the time. So what happened at the time? In 1818, this young man came to Delhi, and he became a student of Shah Abdul Aziz, the son of Shah Waliullah. And people immediately realized his spiritual powers. Allah had blessed him with some very, very strong spiritual sense. And Maulana Abdul Hayy went to see him one day, who was a very close friend of Muhammad Ismail Dehlawi. When he went to see him, he had a discussion with him about Salah, the importance of Salah and the secrets of Salah. So he explained things to him he had never heard before. So Sayyid Ahmad Shaheed, who later on became the Amir of this movement, which I'm going to talk about in due course now, he said to Maulana Abdul Hayy that forget about the talk, let's pray with me and see what happens. So they prayed together. they prayed together, and Maulana Abdul Hayy would state later on that what Allah gave me in those 2 raka'ats, or in those raka'atain, when I prayed with him, I have not achieved that in my life, my entire life of my study. I have not achieved that what Allah gave me in those 2 rak'atayn. Allahu alam what he experienced. Only Allah knows. This is what he said. So then he went to Muhammad Ismaeel Dehlavi, this man we are talking about today. He told him about this. That this man, people are not just following him for no reason. He has some very strong, Allah has blessed him with something. And we believe in karama. We as Ahlul Sunnati wal Jama'ah, we believe Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala blesses His beloved people, His awliya, with karamat. With, I don't know if the word is miracles. What is the word in English? Spiritual powers?
I mean, mu'jiza is miracle, but karamat, they say kharqul adat. I mean,
Special gift.
events breaking natural laws.
Supernatural powers.
Yeah,
Let's say some supernatural powers, what we call karamat. Karamat, people know. Some people believe or think that we do not believe in karamat. We do.
but not as a power. I mean, it's things Allah makes happen.
Of course,
at
of
their
course.
hands. Yes.
They are not independent. They're not doing these things themselves. So, Sayyid Ahmad Shaheed rahmatullah alayh, who was the leader of this group, he became the Amir of this group, and Shah Ismaeel Shaheed or Muhammad Ismaeel Dehlavi became one of his followers. This man obviously had some spiritual, supernatural powers Allah had blessed him with because of his sincerity, his zuhud, his taqwa. Like the Sahaba, some of the Sahaba had these powers, Allah had given them. Or like some of the Aimma had these powers. Okay, things normal people cannot achieve. So through his worship, through his taqwa, through his dedication to Allah and His Messenger, Allah had blessed him with these things. So Maulana Abdul Hayy, or Shaykh Abdul Hayy, went to Muhammad Ismaeel al-Dehlavi rahmatullah alayhi and told him about this. Muhammad Ismaeel was not really into these spiritual things, or not really into these, because he was already very sick of the Sufis. Because in his view, a lot of the Sufis, not all of them, a lot of the Sufis had corrupted Islam. They had brought in things which were not part of Islam. So he thought maybe this is another miracle man or something. Okay? But then he went to meet him and spoke to him. And Sayyid Ahmad, he said the same thing to him. Forget about talking. Inshallah, tonight we pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala together. They prayed. And immediately in the morning, Muhammad Ismaeel rahmatullah alayhi was so impressed that he gave his bay'ah. His bay'ah to this man, his pledge of allegiance to this man called Sayyid Ahmad Shaheed al-Barelvi. Al-Barelvi is a reference to his origin, his place of origin. There's a city called Bareilly. Okay, nowadays there's a sect called Al-Barelawiyya. Okay, Barelvi, there's a sect. We're not talking about the sect. We're talking about the city called Bareilly. Sayyid Ahmad Shaheed came from the city of Bareilly. That's why he's also known as Sayyid Ahmad Shaheed al-Barelawi. Not because he followed that sect. The sect didn't exist at the time. The sect only came about after the birth of another man called Ahmad Rida Khan Barelawi, who initiated the sect, who died, who was born years after the death of Sayyid Ahmad Shaheed. So, after realizing his strength, his power, the spiritual gift Allah had bestowed upon him, they gave him bay'ah. And at this time, Sayyid Ahmad Shaheed, he built a movement around him of da'wah, wal irshad. Go out and guide people, tell them about Islam, tell them about pure Islam, teach them about the Quran and the Sunnah. So the fact that people like Muhammad Ismaeel Dehlavi, scholars like him and scholars like Abdul Hayy had given bay'ah to him, that was a huge boost to the profile of Sayyid Ahmad Shaheed rahmatullah alayh. People started to consider him someone very, very special. If people like Muhammad Ismaeel and Abdul Hayy, top students, the best, known students of Abdul Aziz al-Dehlavi, al-Muhaddis al-Dehlavi, have given bay'ah to this man, then this man is not an ordinary man. So thousands of people flocked around him. At the same time, when they were going around giving speeches and da'wah to people, coming back to Allah's, coming back to the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ and go away from bid'ah and shirk, they went to the city of Lucknow and they did their bayans there. At the same time, some scholars in India gave a fatwa that Hajj is no longer obligatory upon Muslims because of the difficulty of the Hajj, because when they would go for Hajj, people would get killed. The Bedouins on the way, they would attack them. They would get robbed and killed, and all kind of things would happen to people, the Indian Muslims, because Indian Muslims were known for their richness. They were rich, they had a lot of money, and the Bedouins in the Arabian desert knew that these caravans from India, they are loaded. Okay, so they attacked them and they took the money from them. This happened a number of times, too many times. So some ulama gave this fatwa that Hajj is no longer obligatory because it is now a matter of life and death. So now Sayyid Ahmad Shaheed, he asked Sheikh Abdul Hayy and Sheikh Muhammad Ismaeel al-Dehlavi rahmatullahi alayhima to give a fatwa, a counter fatwa. Now Sayyid Ahmad Shaheed, who was the leader of both of these individuals, was not a scholar himself. He was a learned man but not a scholar. These were the people who were muftis, scholars. So he asked them to give a fatwa, and they both gave a fatwa that this fatwa is batil. Hajj can never be erased, just like salah, zakat can never be erased from our obligations. Hajj is no different. It cannot be erased despite all the difficulties. So we have to go for Hajj. And to prove this fatwa wrong, we will go for Hajj. Allahu Akbar. He announced that we will practically, these people were not a bunch of, talkers. They were doers. They were doers. They took Islam seriously. They said, okay, if this is the thing, we will go and do Hajj ourselves. So Sayyid Ahmad Shaheed, he announced that we are going for Hajj and everyone is welcome. Allahu Akbar. So when he announced this, they started to bring people in. And all of this was happening in 1822. 1822. So they started making the journey for Hajj overland within India, going towards Calcutta, to the coast, right, where they could take the ship for Hajj. And initially there were 400 people. By the time they reached Calcutta, it was 800 people. So they hired 11 ships actually, 11 ships, and each ship was given a name and each ship had an Amir. Overall Amir was Sayyid Ahmad Shaheed. And they boarded the ships, they went for Hajj. 10 months later, they got to Makkah, they did the Hajj in Makkah. A lot of scholars came and they met them. Muhammad Ismaeel Shaheed rahmatullah alayh gave durus in Masjid al-Haram on Hujjatullah al-Baligha, the book of his grandfather, which was little known at the time in Arabia, but when these lectures were given by Muhammad Ismaeel al-Dehlavi in Masjid al-Haram, a lot of the scholars got to know this text and they became very impressed and the text became known. Maulana Abdul Hayy, Sheikh Abdul Hayy was giving durus on Mishkat al-Masabih in Masjid al-Haram, and Sayyid Ahmad Shaheed was supervising all of this. And then they went to Medina. When they went to Medina, at this time the Ottomans were ruling the Arabian Peninsula. They had taken it back from the Wahhabis, who they called the Wahhabis. The Wahhabis had been defeated. The followers of Sheikh Muhammad bin Abdul Wahhab rahmatullah alayh, he had passed away 1799. Sheikh rahmatullah alayh passed away in 1799, and we are talking about 1822. Very soon after the death of Sheikh Muhammad bin Abdul Wahhab, the Ottomans had taken back the land of Hijaz from the followers of Sheikh Muhammad bin Abdul Wahhab. So at this time, this was very sensitive period. Anyone who talked against bid'ah and shirk would be labeled as Wahhabi and then hunted. Khalas, this is a troublemaker, he's one of them. Catch him. No mercy. So the sheikhs were very careful at that time. So in Medina, when they went there, someone organized a Mawlid celebration. Some of the scholars in Medina, they organized a Mawlid celebration. So they invited Sayyid Ahmad Shaheed with his entourage. thinking that Sayyid Ahmad Shaheed is one of those Indian Sufis, he will happily come and join us. He was a man of tasawwuf, no doubt. He was a man of spiritualism. Sayyid Ahmad Shaheed had very, very strong spiritual powers, supernatural powers. Allah had blessed him with a lot, but he was not a person who indulged in these things in the name of Islam. So he sent back a message to these people who invited him. He said, if this is for lahaw wal la'ab, okay, then it is not for me. I'm not interested in it. If it's a plaything, if you want to just celebrate and dance and sing, I'm not interested. But it is for ajr and thawab, then tell me where it is in the Quran and the Sunnah, and I'll come happily, because we have come here to Hijaz from India, having traveled for nearly a year for thawab, for ajr. If there is ajr, we will be the first ones to join you. So they went silent. Obviously there was no evidence for Mawlid in the Quran and the Sunnah. There is no evidence, and they went silent. So cut the long story short, 3 years later, these people came back. 3 years later they came back. So it took them 3 years to go and come back from Hajj. So when they came back, Sayyid Ahmad Shaheed announced that we will now go and confront the Sikhs in Punjab, because a lot of Muslims were coming in from the Punjab region and telling the stories of brutality against Muslims. So Shah Ismaeel Shaheed, Muhammad Ismail Dehlavi Rahmatullah alayh, he wanted to confirm this himself in person. So he went to Lahore. Having traveled through Punjab, he went to Amritsar. From Amritsar, he went to Lahore, stayed in Lahore, and he saw with his own eyes what he saw. And he described it in his works, that Muslims were being brutalized. Muslims had lost their deen. They had completely lost any sense of Islam. And this is what happens when alien cultures are politically imposed upon Muslims. This is what happens. So the Sikhs were governing, and there were reports that when Muslims would be slaughtering the goats and the cows, the Sikhs would come and tell them to recite the name of the Guru. The Guru on the animal, not Allah. So if you want to say Allah, they say the name of the Guru at the same time as well. So, and mosques had turned into offices, in some cases stables where horses were tied. A lot of these things are happening. And to give you a very quick background, Ranjit Singh came to power in 1799. He took Lahore in 1799 when Muhammad Ismail Rahmatullah alayhi was a young man. He was possibly 18 years old when this happened. Ranjit Singh took the city of Lahore from the Afghans in 1799, and then he created an empire around it. So after Lahore, they took other cities. So by the time Ranjit Singh died in 1839, 40 years later, the Sikhs were governing land from Peshawar to Multan. This was a large, huge empire they had created. And the British did not attack them, did not want to touch them as long as Ranjit Singh was alive, who was a strong leader, no doubt. He had strong policies. So in this period, a lot of this happening. So Sayyid Ahmad Shaheed and Shah Ismaeel Shaheed and others in the group decided that we should fight the Sikhs to liberate the Muslims from this tyranny. We should go and fight the Sikhs. So they cut the long story short, they went around, they preached about the virtues of jihad against a tyrannical power. A lot of people joined them in thousands, and in fact close to 1,000 people joined him, and then they made their way towards Afghanistan. Instead of going straight to Punjab, they took a different route. First they went to Balochistan. From Balochistan they entered Afghanistan. They reached Kandahar. In Kandahar, many Pashtun tribal fighting men joined them, and then they came back and they took the city of Peshawar from the Sikhs. They took the city of Peshawar from the Sikhs, and the Sikhs were shocked. Ranjit Singh in Lahore on his throne was shaken, and suddenly this menace has appeared in Punjab. Where did these people come from suddenly? And they are very few, between 500 to 1,000 men. How did this happen? The Pathans couldn't fight us. They couldn't do it. How did these Indians from Delhi, who were known for their luxury, for their easy life, for their soft hands and soft lives, they were not like Pashtuns, tough, hard men, mountain men. No, these were city-dwelling citizens. You know, Delhi is known civilization of Delhi. People are very nazuk, what we call nazuk, yeah? What's the word? Sorry? Soft.
Fragile.
Fragile. Like glass. Very civilized, you know, very feminine type people. Known for their poetry and their, you know, their romance kind of thing. Right? And they have come and defeated the Sikhs. How did this happen? So they couldn't make sense of it. Another battle took place in which there were 80,000 Muslims together with Pashtuns and local tribes from Peshawar and Afghanistan and the Indians, and on the other side 35,000 Sikhs. This battle was called or known as the Battle of Attak. The Battle of Attak. In this battle, unfortunately, some of the Pashtun leaders, such as Yar Muhammad Khan, who was the ruler of Peshawar at that time, betrayed the Mujahideen. They were known as Mujahideen, these people. They were known, this is the name that was given to them. And Sayyid Ahmad Shaheed was known as Amirul Mu'mineen because he was Sayyid, so they appointed him as Amirul Mu'mineen. And Muhammad Ismaeel Rahmatullah alayh was his Sipah Salar, or he was general of the army, right? So they had these ranks already established. So Yar Muhammad Khan betrayed Sayyid Ahmad Shaheed and he had poisoned the leader, the Amir. So in the battle was a definite win. It was a definite victory. There was no doubt that it was a victory. Because of the betrayal of some of these Pashtun leaders, the Sikhs were victorious. Because the leader was poisoned, Sayyid Ahmad Shaheed, who was given an elephant in India as a present, was vomiting on the elephant. So when Muhammad Ismaeel Rahmatullah alayh saw what was happening, he quickly rushed, and the battle was lost because of this chaos and this confusion, because people thought the Amir is dying. The Amir is dying. You know, when the Amir is dead, the leader is dead, then the battle is over. So Muhammad Ismaeel Dehlavi Rahmatullah alayh rushed to the elephant on his horse. He took the Sayyid off the elephant, and took him to an unknown location where he was catered for, he was treated, and he survived the poisoning. He survived the poisoning, and it caused a lot of damage to his internal organs, and it took him a long time to recover. So this is one story of the betrayal. And cut the long story short, this group of Muslims took some territory from the Sikhs, and they were moving further and further and further. So Ranjit Singh from Lahore wrote letters to Sayyid Ahmad Shaheed telling him Khalifa Sahib, and this is how he would refer to him in the letters. Khalifa Sahib. Khalifa Sahib, stay where you are. Keep the territory you have, don't come any further. You can have the territory you have, don't come any further. But the Sayyid was not listening. Rather, Sayyid was corresponding with the king of Bukhara and other Muslim rulers in the region, asking them to come and join him to push away the Sikhs, to take back the territory that belonged to Muslims and liberate the Muslims of these lands. Then, unfortunately, the land they had taken, the people betrayed them. Cut the long story short, they had taken all of this land in the northwestern frontier post, as it was known at the time, or what we know today as KPK, Khyber Pakhtunkhwa province. They had taken a lot of territory there, and they had established a state there, and they had implemented the Sharia law. This group had implemented the Sharia law. So a lot of people, the Pashtuns, due to their excessive racism and tribalism, they rebelled against this group because they were Indians, and the Pashtun didn't like being governed by the Indians. And then these tribes rebelled and they killed a lot of these people, unfortunately. So disheartened as they felt, Sayyid Ahmad Shaheed and Shah Ismaeel Shaheed, they made their way towards Kashmir. They walked away from this territory. They left it because they could no longer govern it. So they went towards Kashmir. Ranjit Singh, cut the long story short, sent an expedition under the leadership of his son called Sher Singh, This happened in May 1831. Sher Singh came with an army, a large Sikh army, and he met these people, the followers of Sayyid Ahmad Shaheed and Shah Ismaeel Shaheed, at a place called Balakot, which is currently in Pakistan, and a battle ensued, and the outcome was a massacre of the Muslims. So the leader Sayyid Ahmad Shaheed was Shaheed, he was killed in this battle. Shah Ismaeel Shaheed was also killed in this battle, and they are both buried in this place called Balakot. And these people, they reminded the Indian Muslims of the Sahaba, wallahi. They revived the memory of Ashab al-Rasul. They made it look real. And the people who were opposing them were nowhere near them in knowledge, in sacrifice, in character and dedication. People who were criticizing Shah Ismaeel Shaheed, who became a martyr, Shaheed inshallah, as we believe. People who criticized him then, people who criticize him today, are nowhere near him in character, in knowledge, in dedication. Some of these people with big bellies, fake peers and fake Sufis condemn him, criticize him for his works against bid'ah and shirk. Some of these people who criticize Muhammad Ismail Dehlavi rahmatullah alayh haven't even been slapped in the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. These people gave their lives defending the Muslims, trying to protect the Muslims of Punjab, and they gave their lives. And because of this sacrifice, Islam was given a life. You know, this sacrifice affected the Muslims to such an extent that their works became widespread after this martyrdom. This sacrifice of this group of people in Balakot in 1831, Muslims of India suddenly woke up. They suddenly woke up, and people started to pay attention to their teachings even more. They started to know, or they wanted to know, who was this Sayyid Ahmad Shaheed? Who was Muhammad Ismail Dehlavi? We want to know about these people. And before you know, we had the revival of Islam. What we know today, Islam in India today, is the work of this very, very group. This very group. So the schools, two schools in particular, that came about as a result, they came about from this very group of people. The school of Deoband and the school of Ahlul Hadith. Both schools, scholars who headed these schools emerged from this group of people. They emerged from this very group. Some of them actually are the survivors of this massacre. Maulana Inayat Ali, Maulana Vilayat Ali, two brothers from Azimabad, Patna, were survivors of this massacre. And some other Hanafi ulama, they were survivors of this massacre. Or they were the teachers, or the survivors or the teachers of some of the people who became scholars of the school of Deoband. So Islam was revived in India, in the subcontinent, by the sacrifice of these people. A lot more can be said. A lot more will be said in the future, inshallah. This was a very short introduction on the lives of these people. I strongly recommend that you read books on these people. You will see a picture of a book which I strongly recommend in the English language. It gives you an introduction of this very topic. It will give you some details about what happened academically, and I'm sure you can find it online on the internet, inshallah ta'ala. And there are many more books written in the Urdu language. There is one I strongly recommend, which is of course the biography of Shah Ismaeel Shaheed by a man called Hussain Hassani. He has written this book. There is another biography of Shah Ismaeel Shaheed written by Mirza Hairat Dehlavi. There is a huge biography of Sayyid Ahmad Shaheed written by Maulana Ghulam Rasul Mahar. And there is another biography called Swane Ahmadi written by the Nawab of Tonk. You can also look at these books and inshallah learn more about this particular movement called Movement of Shah Ismaeel Shaheed and Sayyid Ahmad Shaheed rahmatullah alayhima. Thank you so much. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Walhamdulillahi rabbil alameen.
Just two questions, Sheikh.
Yes.
I mean, first of all, because just to clarify the word power, because the Sufis, they used it like, you know, I mean, it is ambiguous word. So the Sufi, they use it like Allah has given power to the saint and he has kun fayakun, he can decide. While Ismail Delvi, he says that it's miracles that like, I mean, if someone walks on water, is not burnt by fire, it's Allah who makes these things happen on their hand, but it's not an attribute, like we have the attribute of speaking or hearing.
Yes.
The power is the action of Allah that happens.
If Isa alayhi salam, if we are told in the Quran, these people, these Sufia, awliya, whoever they are, if Allah has given them karamat, they are not bigger than Isa alayhi salam, are they?
No.
Can they ever be bigger than Isa alayhi salam? Isa alayhi salam was who? A prophet of Allah and one of the Ulul Azm. Ulul Azm, messenger of Allah. He was Rasulullah. Also Rasulullah. Not only Nabi Allah, Rasulullah. What does Allah say about him? That what he does is bi'idhnillah. Bi'idhnillah. By the permission of Allah. So Allah is telling us that even Isa alayhi salam is not doing things from himself. It is being done by the idhn of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So it is Allah who gives these people these strengths and powers. And who are these people, by the way? And this is exactly what Muhammad Ismail al-Dehlavi rahmatullah alayhi talked about. In one of his speeches, which was documented by Mirza Hayat Dehlavi, he talks about as to who is a real faqir. You know, the word faqir was misunderstood in India at that time. Faqir is someone who looks like a faqir, someone who is walking around naked in the streets, or someone who is claiming to be a wali of Allah, but he's nothing but someone who is completely out of Islam. His Islam is in shak. He stated, a real faqir is someone who completely relies on Allah, does not break the rules of Sharia, and is not involved in any wrongful activity. Someone who is completely Islamic. Someone who is following the rules of Sharia. Okay? And this is what the scholars have explained. That if someone claims to be a wali of Allah and he is doing things against the Sharia, he is not a wali of Allah, he's shaitan. He's a human shaitan. Beware of him. Okay? This is why there is a statement attributed to Junaid al-Baghdadi, rahmatullah alayhi. Al-Junaid al-Baghdadi, he said, if someone puts a musalla, mu'allaq, you know, mu'allaq in the air. Someone puts a musalla in the air, not on the floor, in the air, and prays on it. And one of his actions is against the sunnah. Then beware of that person, because he is not a man of Allah, is someone else. He's something else. So these powers, these kiramat are blessings of Allah to people who are beloved to Allah. And Allah can never love someone who is against the sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam.
No, but just technically, I mean, what Ibn Taymiyyah and other scholars, they explain, even Ghazali, they said it's, I mean, though some call it power, they say it's things that Allah is doing it at their hands.
Yes.
Like Musa, he didn't have the power, like he has the power to speak.
Yeah.
That when the snake turned into a stick, he got scared.
Yes.
Likewise, they said these things happen on their hands.
Yes.
Like the dead coming back to life. Even
That's
Ibn
right.
Taymiyyah said, even some followers of Isa, and it's possible that they come back on their
There's a
hands.
hadith of the Prophet ﷺ that a person reaches the level of ihsan, he becomes so close to Allah through his ibadah, through his obedience, through his dedication and sincerity, that his hands become the hands of Allah, his feet becomes the feet of Allah. Doesn't mean literally he becomes Allah. It means what Allah starts to do things through him.
Yeah.
He becomes a tool of Allah. He becomes a tool of Allah. Allah starts to do things through him.
Because that's what Shah Ismaeel explains. That
That's right.
if you say the Barelvi, this is what they said. The Barelvi, they said they have given powers. They can decide you go back to life. And Shah Ismaeel, he says it's not like an attribute like we've given the power to speak, we can use it.
Yes.
But the karamat, it only comes on Allah wills, meaning
Yes.
if a saint doesn't have karamat this time, he will be martyred.
Yes.
If Allah wants to make him invisible, disappear,
Yeah.
he will be saved.
Yes.
So this is, I mean, technically the word power, Brelvi use it
Yeah.
to say atai power, so the saint controls the universe and
No,
the
no, no.
So this
In
is what
fact,
this word...
anyone, the Shia who believe that the Imams have power over ma kana ma yakun,
Yeah,
for
yeah.
example.
Every
they have,
atom of
they
the
have
universe.
ilm al-ghaib. These aqaid, these beliefs constitute kufr. Anyone who gives attributes to Allah, he leaves Islam. Whether he knows or not is another question. Technically, I'm giving the ruling. Yani, this is the ruling in Islam. I'm not giving a fatwa on specific people. I'm saying that technically, if someone gives attributes to Allah,
Of Allah to creation.
someone gives attributes of Allah to humans, for example, someone believes that Allah can hear everything, and there is someone else who can also hear everything, such a belief constitutes kufr. We believe only Allah is al-basir, as-sami', okay? So only Allah knows, and Allah sees, and like Allah no one else sees. So if Allah sees everything and the Prophet sees everything, then what is the difference between Allah and the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam? If Allah is the only one who has ilmul ghaib according to the Quran is clear about it, and people claim that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam has ilmul ghaib, the knowledge of the unseen, independent knowledge, then what's the difference between Allah and the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam? If Allah is the one who hears everything and the Prophet hears everything, then what's the difference between Allah and the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam? So these beliefs constitute disbelief. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam came to tell people that it is only Allah alone who has these attributes and powers. No one else does.
Just a second.